This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Hello, I'm Brad Crone, sitting in this week for Tom Campbell, who's away. The state legislature returned to the capital city this week. We take a look at the top issues facing our lawmakers. Then it's a preview of Campaign 2020, where we discuss the presidential, the U.S. Senate, Supreme Court, and Council of State races. Plus, our panel will tell us something we don't know. Joining us this week, Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation, Howard Lee, former state senator and chairman of the Board of Education, Rick Henderson, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, and Rufus Edmisten, former Secretary of State and Attorney General. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Closing the health insurance coverage gap could create 43,000 jobs, billions in economic activity, and save rural hospitals. Let's find a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured. Visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get started. The state legislature returned to the capital city this week for the start of the long session, and there are a number of important issues our lawmakers are facing. This week, we're going to take an in-depth look at the 2019 session. Question 1 to Rick Henderson. Give us the top issues you see, and I hear there's already a fight brewing.
That's right. We have already a dispute brewing between the House and Senate over funding of school construction. House Speaker Tim Moore and Governor Roy Cooper favor a $1.9 billion bond to fund school construction across the state. The state Senate is proposing instead a pay-as-you-go system, which essentially dedicates more general fund revenue each year to school spending. And Speaker's been going around the state already touting this bond. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because apparently at the initial press conference where the Senate rolled out its plan, they pretty much admitted they hadn't talked to the House about this. That's not a good sign going into the session.
Becki, how big will this chasm be? The Speaker has been campaigning rather actively all across the state promoting his bond referendum.
Well, Brad, I think we're looking at this the wrong way. I don't necessarily see this as a big fight. I see this as two differing ways to solve a problem. And the problem they're trying to solve is school construction. We have some school districts that are outgrowing the schools that they have. We have some school systems that are actually shrinking, but the school buildings in those districts are so outdated, and with trying to put internet and those give access to the students there's all kinds of challenges. They're different across the state. This is just two plans to get at a problem. One would be a bond, and look at it this way. So as I see it, the Speaker's plan with the construction bond, that would be like putting it on your credit card, where you're going to have interest that you're going to have to pay on it. The Senate plan goes about it like you would have that deducted from your paycheck. So the Senate has said their plan is worth consideration because the money will be available faster. It will be cheaper. Now, here's the question, though, that I think we should all be asking. No matter how we're going to pay for this, what exactly are those projects? And we want to make sure, whether we pay as we go or we put it on the credit card, that the projects are, first of all, necessary, and also that we spend that money the best that we can, rather than just spreading the money across the state because we happen to have it.
Rufus, the governor's indicated that he's going to make classroom teachers a priority, increasing salaries there and putting more money into the schools at the classroom level. How successful, what type of response do you expect out of the legislature there?
Well, I'll say that's nothing new. For the past 50 years since all of this table has been around, that's been the number one question. What are we going to do for the school teachers? And I would hope that part of his will comprise part of of the teachers' aides. I'm a great believer in that. My sister was one for all those years. I believe you're going to get, Brad, some cooperation this year between the governor and the legislature on the business of funding schools, because everybody shows that it's the number one question on the minds of the people in North Carolina. So I'm looking for some really surprisingly cooperative nature over there.
Howard, you've been chairman of the State Board of Education and then in the process for appropriations and spending money in education. Last week it was interesting, the Public School Forum put a major news release out talking about the investment in our public schools as an institution. How important is that?
I think it's extremely important, and I must say that I'm absolutely delighted that the legislature appears to be making public education a higher priority than it has in the last few years. And so we should celebrate that. I'm certainly thinking as we drill down the fact that there's emphasis on school construction, because we do have school buildings in our state that really are as bad as some third world schools when it comes to places in which we educate our kids. But teacher salaries are certainly one of the other areas, but professional development is equally important. And then finally, I'd say, I hope the legislature, in the process of evaluating this educational direction, will go back and look at this letter grade system that we put in place, because that's putting so much pressure and doing so much damage to schools.
Rick, there was a lot of discussion this past week about capping the number of charter schools. How well do you think that's going to be received? The Republican majority since 2010 have really, they lifted the cap and they have supported choice in public education. Is that a starting point argument, or will it get anywhere in the legislature?
I don't think it gets anywhere in the legislature, because we have seen such great success from charter schools and such demand from charter schools, especially the schools that have scored well in comparisons to other schools, both traditional and non-traditional. And I think that we're going to see actually continued expansion of that. We're going to be up, almost hit that 200 school cap, I think, this next year. And Howard's quite familiar with the charter school situation himself from his own activities in Durham County about this. And I just think that the charter schools are going to continue to grow. You remember that in the most recent count, the Wake County school system expected to enroll something like 19,000 more students this year, and instead it enrolled only 42. So that means that there is a demand for non-traditional schooling, and I think the legislature is simply satisfying that demand.
Becki, last word on the education issue about our charter schools. How would you grade the success of our public schools over the last 8 years, our charter schools under the public school financing under the last 8 years?
Well, you know, I think the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, you know, Rick mentioned the number of charter schools, and Senator Lee certainly has experience with that, but there are 55,000 children today that are on waiting lists to get into charter schools. So when you have that kind of demand, when you have parents making that choice to send their children to charter schools, you know, the fastest growing part of the sort of alternative school is homeschoolers. So you're having a lot of parents choose these options outside the traditional public schools. Now, we still need to make the traditional public schools as strong as we possibly can, but when you have that kind of competition and offer parents choices and students choices to find the best opportunity that fits their needs, I think we're on the right track.
Brad, I noticed that one of our poor rural counties has closed down two public schools, because they say the charter schools are sapping off their support.
It's clearly going to be a big issue. There are several other important issues our state lawmakers will be facing during the long session. Health care is one of them. Rufus, the governor, says he's going to make Medicaid expansion a top priority when it comes to health care issues in the state. What say you?
Good for him. It's about time that we let all these other states stop taking the money that belongs to North Carolina. It's taxpayer money. I know that the president of the Senate is very worried about aftermath of spending. That's a legitimate thing. However, we have people out here right now that are just starving to death for health care, and this is the easiest, most efficient way to do it, and I hope we get on with it. I think you'll have some kind of a step-by-step hybrid kind of Medicaid coverage, and I hope we get on with it.
Becki, the Medicaid program in North Carolina has improved tremendously since the Republicans took control, bringing some type of predictability to the program. Primarily under the leadership of Representative Nelson Dollar, he has, under his leadership, even though he's left the General Assembly, was instrumental in getting a baseline number, and actually they've been running surpluses. Yet the Speaker of the House has said he's at least willing to have a discussion on Medicaid expansion. Where will that go with the Republican Conservative caucus? Are they willing to debate it? And if so, do they connect scope of practice and perhaps certificate of need to that issue?
Well, there's a lot packed into that question. And yes, we have already seen. I mean, last year there was a bill that was proposed in the House of Representatives that came out with a thing called Carolina Cares, which was kind of a North Carolina, touted as a North Carolina model of Medicaid expansion. So we're already seeing this. The Senate has been much more careful and on really pulling back on looking at the cost, looking at other things. But if the question is, if the problem is health insurance is unaffordable for a large population in North Carolina, what we should be looking at is how do we make health insurance more affordable? And you can do that with things like, and many of these are going to be under consideration this session, association health plans, perhaps buying plans across state lines, opening up that a little bit, eliminating some of the mandates that the insurance companies are required to put into place. Scope of practice, increasing access to health care is another big thing. It doesn't matter what kind of health insurance you have. If you don't have access to the providers, that doesn't really get you where you need to be. But in my view, if the problem is, and I think most people agree that health insurance is unaffordable, it is too expensive, let's look at ways to bring those costs down and to be able to provide to people a policy that best suits their needs, affordability. Let's move that way instead of just conceding that the health insurance is what it is and it's going to be outlandishly expensive for people and we need to subsidize more and more and more of it. I think that's the wrong direction to go. The other way seems to be much more sustainable.
Howard, another major issue in the General Assembly's ABC control, the major retailers, Target, Walmart, CVS, want to get into the liquor sales business. The craft beer industry wants to be able to produce and sell their product without having to go through wholesalers. How's the ABC fight work out in the General Assembly?
Well, I certainly think it will probably be the same it has through the years. We've had this fight over the years, and I've been involved very much in it. I am not a great fan of loosening things up so that anybody can walk in anywhere and have access to alcohol. I do think, however, that it is time to think seriously about whether or not the current ABC system is the best for us. I do think we could move that system in a different direction, privatize it to a certain extent, get a lot of resources out of that, and still have the ABC Commission control over the implementation of it. So I don't expect the legislature to act definitively to approve anything this year, but I certainly think it'll be much more discussed and evaluated than it has been in recent years.
Rick Henderson talking about control. Legalized marijuana is gaining momentum in other states. North Carolina willing to look at it?
Probably not as full legalization program, but Representative Kelly Alexander from Mecklenburg County has for more than a decade now introduced legislation to legalize marijuana for medicinal uses. CBD oil is now legal, it's now available in many places, and I think that we will see a move toward legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes. There was a recent poll taken in South Carolina which said more than 70% of Republicans, Democrats, and independents support medicinal marijuana. South Carolina may actually legalize medical marijuana before North Carolina does.
Rufus, DMV was making news this week. They announced the day before Wednesday, on Tuesday, that they were going to move from Raleigh to Rocky Mount pending approval of the Council of State and funding in the state budget. It was a direct slap at current minority leader Senator Dan Blue, who is going to be whipping votes for the governor. How will the DMV get a new headquarters?
It's a direct slap at a lot of people, and I think it's a ridiculous idea, very, very bluntly. And I don't know who's behind it. I never could figure out who was behind it because it's legislation that says do it. But remember this, the Council of State must approve. I haven't seen a head count yet. I don't know what they're going to do. Even if they do, then you've got to go back and get money from the legislature, and that's where Senator Blue will have his clout. And I have a notion that we are not going to be seeing DMV pack up and leave and go to Rocky Mount
anytime soon. Dan Blue's one of the longest serving legislators in the General Assembly. Don't ever count out Senator Dan Blue. Howard Lee, the last issue on legislative session, water quality. Gen X's news this week that it's being re-imported back into the Chemours plant down in Cumberland County. Will we see any movement on water quality issues, especially around the Gen X issue?
I sure hope so. I've been watching that situation unfold, and it took me back to a time in my life as a bad dream when I had to deal with Texas Gulf sulfur and the Chowan River being polluted. I think our water quality is so important to North Carolina, and clean water is so important to the population. I'm hoping that they will give it serious consideration and recognize there is a problem there and we need to manage that.
And they're doing it incrementally. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Well, we're just 13 months away from the 2020 March primary in North Carolina. Campaign 2020 is well underway in North Carolina from an organizing standpoint. Let's look at the presidential campaign on the Republican side. Question one to Becki, will there be a primary there with a credible conservative candidate to challenge the president?
Well, there may very well be. You know, we've heard Jeff Flake's name mentioned. We've heard Governor Kasich's name, Susana Martinez from New Mexico. I mean, other names have been mentioned. But I'll be honest with you, I think probably Trump's biggest threat comes from the Democrat side. The Democrats can come up with a credible candidate. You know, Hillary Clinton was not. That's how we got Donald Trump. If the Democrats come up with a good, solid, credible candidate, that's the biggest threat to Donald Trump. But then recently, and of course he hasn't announced formally, but this notion of Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks, getting into the race, who really is a centrist. I mean, he is the picture of the American dream. He's being accused of being an elite billionaire, but he's somebody that built that company from nothing. You know, does he get into the race, and what does that do? It continues to amaze me that President Trump's followers and supporters stand behind him. I think one thing that may influence this is in the next several months, if something happens that he can't get past and then there's a real gap to fill, I think we may see more interest. But at this point, I think Republicans would do well to really start concentrating on the 2024 election and getting some good candidates and building a strong bench there.
Rick, the Democrats are already out. Cory Booker announced on Friday that he's in it. Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren. Handicap the Democratic presidential primary field?
It's big already, and it's going to get bigger. And I think the challenge the Democrats face is that very many of them look at the model of Barack Obama as someone who didn't have an awful lot of national political exposure, sort of coming out of nowhere and being elected president. And they say, well, if he could do it, then why can't I? That's going to be a challenge for Democrats because you have people who are, let's say, like former Vice President Joe Biden, who is not a young person, but who also has a lot of credibility in a lot of circles. And he's going to be someone who's strongly going to consider a run. I'm still looking at the governors. I'm looking at people who right now even aren't on the scene, like John Hickenlooper from Colorado and the like, as people who have been chief executives before, so they can say they've done more than write laws, they've done more than vote on laws, they've actually implemented laws. And I'm seeing someone along those lines who might be credible.
Rufus, big news this week. The Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court resigning, taking a job at Regent University as the Dean of the Law School there, opening up an important seat on the Supreme Court. How is that going to go? What should we look at from a political standpoint of having candidates on the Supreme Court? Does the governor appoint Robin Hudson, the senior Democrat on the court right now, put somebody else in, look at Newby? What's the play?
Well, I would say, first of all, I don't believe he's going to appoint Newby as the Chief Justice. I think that's pretty pat. I'm going to go out on the limb and say that I'm going to agree with you about that he can get a twofer if he appoints Judge Robin Hudson as the Chief Justice, and then he appoints somebody to replace her. This is like a giant chess game. It's very, very interesting, and nobody knows. I've been trying to think of somebody in the private sector, I call it private sector, that's not a judge, which could be he could appoint on the Supreme Court. I don't think it'll happen. I think he'll take it from the Supreme Court.
What do you think was the reason the Chief Justice would resign? Was it money, going to teach at a prestigious law school?
It certainly wasn't prestige. Now, this is not to say that it's not a good law school. I've met graduates from there. However, it has to be money because the Regent University Law School is not in the top tier of law schools in this country. So I would think it would be love of what he thinks is his calling. And by the way, I think he's made a great Chief Justice.
And it's a conservative-leaning law school.
Yes.
So he can go there and have an impact for sure. Howard Lee, the Lieutenant Governor, rolled out this week his introductory video on Facebook saying he's looking at running for governor. Handicap the governor's race. Will we see more people get in on the Republican side, or does Dan Forrest get a free ride in that primary?
I don't think Dan gets a free ride. I'm confident that there will be others to get in, although I don't have a name that I can throw out as that possibility. And of course, you know, the governor's office is looking really good to a lot of people right now, and they think they can come in and take it because of North Carolina's voting patterns. I don't think Dan is anywhere near being a shoo-in. I don't see any challenge to Roy Cooper. So it's going to be an interesting race to see how it shapes up. I think when you look at Dan and the Lieutenant Governor's race on the Republican side, you go back and look at how these presidential candidates are going to fare in North Carolina. And of course, with the numbers we have coming in here, the thing I would suggest is they form a choir and hope somebody can sing.
It's a multi-million-dollar enterprise too. Both of them will be really out having to raise a bunch of money. The governor was in New York City this week, actually got some criticism because of the statement of his invitation. Becki, let's look at the U.S. Senate race. On the Republican side, tell us, will he have a primary? And who are the candidates for the Democrats?
He may very well have a primary, but we've got a full slate already for the Senate seat. Senator Dan Blue is a name that has been mentioned with that. Several others are talking about it. That's going to be
Erica
a
Smith
full
Ingram
slate. Yep, from
announced
the
last
another
week.
another
Deborah
senator
Ross is being
looking at
named.
it. Mm-hmm.
So does someone from the right look at running against
You know,
Tillis?
there are perhaps, yes, there are some Republicans who are unhappy with Thom Tillis, who feel like he has moved too much to the center. You're kind of seeing this through some of the discussion. His name is mentioned in some of those very small backdoor meetings that are occurring about how to get past this, the wall question, and how to get past that, the government shutdown and those kind of things. You know, he is positioning himself, it looks like to me, as a centrist, but somebody who gets things done. There are conservatives in the Republican Party who feel like he's moving too much to the center, and so I think that he will have some opposition. But you know how serious that is, I don't know. Another expensive race, though.
Rick, any congressional races coming up next year other than the 9th District special election possible here? And then, of course, we heard news this week that Walter Jones is in hospice care, and our thoughts and prayers go out to his family for sure. Are those going to be sort of the focus congressional seats?
I think those two are going to be the big ones for sure, because you know, it's been said many times before that that Walter Jones was the only Republican who could win that district, and so the Democrats are going to be very interested in looking at that district. There will be a lot of Republican competition, and in the 9th, it's going to be wide open, and whoever wins that is going to have a leg up.
And
on the next
we'll have to see what the new Board of Elections does. It's now time for our panelists to tell us something we don't know, a favorite part of the show for me. We'll start with Rufus Edmisten.
Not Judge, but Dean Rich Little at Campbell Law School has written an enticing law review article on Chief Justice John Marshall, who used to visit North Carolina very frequently. And we know that Marshall authored the decision that more or less set up our own form of government. He lived here, he ate here. It's a fascinating article. I commend it to everybody.
Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I want to remember a boyhood hero that certainly inspired me when I was growing up, and that is a famous baseball player named Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson would have turned 100 years old yesterday. He was the kind of role model that gave little black boys like myself in the South and a feeling of inspiration, and I just want to remember him.
Truly an American icon, no doubt. Becki, tell us something we don't know.
Well, you know, again, looking forward to this 2019 session, one of the big battles is going to be over the budget. We know that. A lot of talk from lots of different areas about more teacher pay, more money for teacher pay, although they've had 5 consecutive teacher pay increases. But remember, last year there was a promise made that the average teacher salary would be raised to $55,000. That is a promise that carries over to this session. That promise has already been made. So in these talks of, gee, we ought to look at raising teacher pay, we've already looked at it. It's all but certain that the average teacher pay will be raised to $55,000 this year.
Rick Henderson, quick. Tell us something we don't know.
The UNC Board of Governors is going to be a very interesting place to watch in the next coming months, because our incoming interim president, Bill Roper, has already shown some signs of independence. And so it could be very interesting over in Chapel Hill.
You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email, give us feedback, and read Tom's weekly column. Visit our website at ncspin.com or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Closing the health insurance coverage gap could create 43,000 jobs, billions in economic activity, and save rural hospitals. Let's find a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured. Visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.